Hey guys, it's Jake. So in my last video, I briefly mentioned that one of the changes between the 25 Faith and Message and the 64 Faith and Message, 63 Faith and Message, was that the 63 Faith and Message got rid of some of the landmarkist language of the earlier confession. And some people asked, what is landmarkism? And some people just who knew what landmarkism was asked me to talk more about it. Sorry if I'm a little distracted. My dog is like sniffing at the floor, and I think there might be like something in here. That's concerning. So anyway, landmarkism is a phenomenon in Southern Baptist history pre-Civil War that's often treated as kind of like a minor footnote in Baptist history, but it was a pretty influential movement that we still see some of the effects of today. And moreover, I just think it's a lot more interesting than it gets credit for. It's kind of a wacky idea that often just gets treated as a wacky idea, but I think it is actually kind of illuminative to talk about. So in this video, I want to give a quick overview of what landmarkism is. I'm not going to give you guys like a full-out history of the landmark movement because, I mean, there's a Wikipedia page about it. You can look it up. But I do want to say what it is and talk about it for a minute and why I think it's interesting and where it came from and how that's helpful. So, landmarkism is an idea that states that the Baptist Church is the one true church, and it's existed in a historical continuity from the time of John the Baptist until the present age, in an unbroken ecclesial line. It was an idea that became popular in Baptist life because of the works of writers like predominantly J.R. Graves. It was popular in the era before the Civil War, so think like 20s and 30s, 1820s, 1830s is when it kind of starts, and it hasn't reigned for a while. I might be off on that, but again, there's a Wikipedia page, look it up. But this idea comes out, and it's mostly a response to the Campbellite movements, where you have people sort of trying to purify the Baptist church as the church is spreading kind of westward and westward in America. These movements come up that claim to be kind of restorations of the original church as Jesus established it. You get almost these sort of Protestant Catholic ideologies of we're going to form these new churches that are now actually finally in continuity with what Jesus did. Baptist churches, when these Campbellite movements that resulted in denominations like the Church of Christ came up, were pretty devastating to Baptist numbers, especially on the frontier. So when the Church of Christ formed, a lot of Baptist churches switched to become Churches of Christ, and a lot of churches that stayed Baptist lost significant numbers of members to the Church of Christ, which was, again, this claim to be a restoration of the true church. Landmarkism was kind of a way to stem that tide. It was almost I hate to say juvenile, but you kind of think of it like that way of claiming, like, well, if the Campbellites or the Church of Christ or the Disciples of Christ are claiming to go all the way back to Jesus, we can do them one better and go back to John the Baptist. Like I said, this isn't a spiritual lineage idea. This is a literal John the Baptist, in the act of baptizing Jesus, started an organization called the Baptist Church, and the Baptist Church has existed as an unbroken organization throughout history ever since then. The very classic explication of this ideology is this book I'm carrying. I don't know that you can see it really well like this, but it's a little pamphlet called The Trail of Blood. It's very famous. It's very easy to get a copy. It's still in print, although most people today would treat it more as a curiosity than anything else. You can still find landmark Baptist churches, but they're very uncommon. I've seen one in my life, like an operating church that believed this. But this little booklet kind of explains the history of the Baptist Church, starting with John the Baptist and moving forward. And in fact, why it's most famous is it's got a full chart you can see here that plots. You've got sort of this big line at the top that shows the first false church, which is Rome, and then you get the second false church kind of branching out of it, the Protestant church, and below that, this unbroken line that represents the Baptist church. And you can't really see it well because it's pretty dark in here. But if you were, you would see that the history of the Baptists, according to this book, The Trail of Blood by J.M. Carroll, very famous, includes kind of odd groups like the Montanists are claimed to be essentially the Baptists of their time. Montanist groups like that. Mostly sort of the soft heretical groups, the groups that are like not part of the mainstream church but aren't actual like heresy named groups. Most of those are traced through history up until the 1600s when you get Smith and Helwys, and then you can actually have a Baptist church proper. So it's a reading of church history that comes with theological claims. So because of this, said the Landmarkists, the Baptist Church is the one true church, and the church is a purely visible organization. So it's the true church in the sense that there is an organization that we are saved through called the Baptist Church, and it's been consistently kind of brought down throughout history in contradistinction to the false Roman and later the false Protestant churches. Because of that, then, you observe kind of stuff that we still get today in like a lot of Southern Baptist life that are vestiges kind of how popular Landmarkism at one time, like closed communion and closed pulpits, where only baptized members of this local church can take communion in this local church's practice of that, and that the pulpit of a local church can't be shared with someone that's not like a minister ordained within that church. The ethos of something like the Fundamental Baptist, the Independent Fundamental Baptist Association, or the New Independent Fundamental Baptist Association, is similar. It may or may not be right to call them Landmarkist churches. Some of them that came more directly out of the SBC will consciously adopt that, if I'm not mistaken. I think Nathan Rager, who's popular with like the IFB Preacher Clips page and stuff like that, I know I've heard him use the phrase like John the Independent Fundamental Baptist a few times. So like, there are churches where the ethos persists, but more broadly, some of the ideas that came out of it are still around, like closed communion and closed pulpits. Mentor of mine, Dr. David Bevington, recalls going to a Landmarkist Baptist church once on a trip to the States, and he says they're very kind people, but when it came time to do communion, if I'm not mistaken, they asked him to leave. Not rudely, not kicking out, just this is sort of a members-only time. What you're probably hearing is I give this description of this movement, which its big end was just sort of after the Civil War. No one really cared to have this debate anymore. It didn't really have it didn't get epically owned or anything. It just sort of went away. It fizzled. There were bigger issues with slavery and all that. And then looking back later, it just kind of seemed silly to most people. But going back to the broader... Sorry, don't mean to be distracted. Just got to be careful whatever the dog is barking at. But going back to the broader issue, the thing you're probably noting is how much... I'm sorry about that dog. Is how much this sounds like expressions of Roman Catholicism, which it absolutely kind of models itself on. And this is where I think Landmarkism is actually a really interesting dialogue partner. So I would like to posit to you, the viewers, that Landmarkism is, for one, entirely continuous with some of these other kind of restorationist movements that came in the 1800s all across America. I'm sorry, there are dogs getting into fights outside of this shed. But that's okay. So, in the 1800s, these were just sort of common things in America because of a blending of Christian theology and kind of American expansionist ethos, and we'll talk about that in a second. Let me see if I can get these dogs to quiet down. I'll come back. The second point I want to sort of talk about and suggest is the idea that Landmarkism is sort of, ironically, a kind of proto-ecumenicism, that it is the sort of growing pains of coming to kind of the ecumenical ethos that sort of characterizes churches, especially in America today. Not all churches, but I think just a dominant ethos. So just kind of church history will show you that there were a lot of kind of what we might call restorationist movements as America expanded westward, and Landmarkism is not much different than any one of these. Whether that be the kind of utopianism, kind of create a heaven on earth, like you would see with something like the Oneida cult, or kind of the impulse of early Mormonism, as I understand it best, or if that's the true restorationism of let's get back to some original thing of something like the Church of Christ. Landmarkism just fits into these bigger patterns that as America expands west and west, these democratic ideals of the American experiment are taking more hold. The church that you're a part of is becoming more than any point in history a matter of personal choice. So you're not just going to the closest local church anymore. You're actually making a conscious decision about what type of Christian you're going to be. And that's not just predetermined by where you were born and what your parents were. And as Christians in America, formed by this democratic ethos, are in this position now where they can choose how to express Christianity, different denominations have identity crises as they have to answer for themselves. Why are we the one? The Church of Christ movement, the Campbellite movement, however you want to call it, is really an example of a sort of internal Baptist dispute where some Baptists say we're not that and we're going to become that. And so then the Baptists that do stay within these broader networks ask themselves, okay, well, why are we right and the Church of Christ is wrong? Or more fundamentally, why are we right and the Methodists are wrong? Why are we right and the Lutherans are wrong? Landmarkism is a way to answer that. Prior to modernity or something like that, but prior to, I guess, the 20th century, the ecumenical movement, some of the changes we see culturally because of, like, Vatican II, you did have churches feeling like they had to need to express why they were the actual correct way to express Christianity. And rhetorically, it's very natural that these attempts to express what were the correct way to express Christianity become why we're the only way to express Christianity. It's a rhetorical appeal to strengthen your case. It's not just that we're the best one, it's that we're actually the only ones, so you do really need to stay with us. And that's where I think Landmarkism is actually a really interesting movement and kind of counterpoint to our current age. It is, ironically, an early kind of answer to ecumenical questions. It's not a good answer at all, obviously. But I think it's helpful to read it in that context. And if we're going to try and place the landmark movement in Baptist life in some narrative, the obvious one that any good historian does is to place it in the context of restorationist movements. But more broadly, I think it's helpful to see it as a kind of proto-ecumenicism. Like I said, because this is kind of such a silly idea, it's kind of hard for it to really take much hold, especially after the Civil War and disruption and some better historical records are coming out. But the question still remains, right, of like, what's the right way to practice Christianity, and how should I think about people that practice Christianity differently than me? Well, in the 20th century, those questions start to get answered in different, better, probably more productive ways. So, is Landmarkism weird? Yeah. Is it funny? It's extremely funny, yeah. If you can kind of get through the dense and kind of weird language of Trail of Blood, it's a pretty entertaining read. But I think that before we just write it off as a punchline, it's at least helpful to historically contextualize it as an interesting movement that in its own way kind of gets us to where we are today. I know that, like, the Southern Baptist Church is not the epicenter of ecumenism in American churches, but those seeds and those impulses are there, and Landmarkism's kind of a growing pain to get to where we are today. So it's an interesting movement that Bear's talking about. Alright, so the dogs are back, and I still haven't found, like, whatever my dog was nosing at in here earlier, so I think I'm going to cut it off. You guys all have a good day. Got a book review coming out soon that I'm excited about. Got an interview that I want to upload soon. Hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. Thanks.